The tennis world is still trembling after Alex Eala dropped a bombshell, a cruel judicial case, a bold public outcry. No one on the tour anticipated the official investigation that the WTA has officially started. There was no whispering in locker rooms about this. This wasn't an ambiguous social media post. Standing in front of cameras and telling the world exactly what had happened to her on that court. This young woman was cool, collected, and outraged. And once she said something, it couldn't be undone. A tennis prodigy was born in the Philippines. However, the world was witnessing something far more potent than skill go place tonight. They were witnessing a combatant who would not be silenced. There's a reason you clicked on this video. You will be absolutely shocked by what actually transpired behind those baseline exchanges, so keep watching. Some athletes enter the scene subtly, earning their spot and meticulously establishing their reputation match after match and point by point. Then there are some who come like lightning, quick, blinding, and unavoidable. The second kind was always Alex Eala. Alexandra Eala, who was born in Manila in 2005, has more aspirations than just becoming a professional tennis player. Coaches stopped mid-drill to note how fiercely she chased it. Whispers among the Philippine tennis scene had already become louder and more certain by the time she was 13. This lady was generational in addition to being gifted. When she was accepted into the highly sought-after Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain, her career took a sharp turn. The same prestigious school that produced some of the most competitive players on the professional tour today. Fingerprints were left all over the Alice game by training under systems created by one of the most mentally powerful winners in the sport. The footwork, the unrelenting baseline aggression, and the mental poise under oppressive circumstances. She took in every instruction and refined it into something that was all her own. Grand Slam titles for juniors came next. The 2020 Roland Garros Women's Doubles Championship comes first. Then, a community that had been waiting decades for a Filipino name to reverberate across Grand Slam courts was rocked by back-to-back US Open girls singles and doubles glory. Every trophy she raised seemed greater than athletics. It seemed like proof, like a sense of national identity. Every time she entered a court back home, the entire nation roared with pride. Eala became more than just a tennis player thanks to the fervent, loyal, and intensely emotional Filipino supporters. She turned into a living example, a symbol, and a response to everyone who questioned whether Southeast Asia should compete at the top level of the sport. However, the weight of symbols is intolerable. Greatness is followed by expectation like a never-ending shadow. Eala also faced something no academy could adequately prepare her for, as she moved from junior domination into the harsh, unforgiving machinery of the WTA professional tour. At the cutting edge of top women's tennis, there are unwritten rules, politics, and hierarchy. She prevailed in games. She rose in the ranks. She gathered data that supported all of her family's sacrifices. Every kilometer, she left her house. In a nation that wasn't hers, she trained before dawn every morning. However, there were lessons on the tour that were not included in any coaching textbook. And it seems that one adversary had been observing Alice's ascent with something considerably more cunning than admiration. The scene was prepared. Beneath the surface, the tension was already rising. The explosion was just one match away, but nobody knew it. There was a certain electric energy in the tournament mood that only arises when something important seemed to be about to happen. That afternoon, Eala entered the court as the type of contestant who attracts attention without asking for it. Her racket was already an extension of pure intention, her movement was clean, and her look was locked. That day, she faced a formidable opponent, a seasoned professional with tactical acumen and a reputation in the locker room that combined respect with something far more nuanced. When her name came up in conversation, players who had previously faced her talked cautiously, selecting words with the meticulous care of those negotiating uncharted territory. The first set was fierce, with the restrained violence that characterizes contemporary women's tennis at its best. Both players traded blows from the baseline. Eala was using her preferred weapon, her forehand, with devastating accuracy. With a focused authority that suggested this afternoon was all her own, she advanced through the first set. The second set then arrived, bringing with it a change that no one watching from the courtside could instantly explain. Something happened that ended the match abruptly at 44, when the crowd was pressing forward and the tension was nearly tangible. A sound came from directly across the net as Eala flung the ball to serve, a move she had performed many times without any problems. No noise from the audience or an unintentional interruption from the stands, unmistakably coming from her opponent's side of the court. It was a purposeful, sharp, and well-timed interruption. Eala's serve fell apart. The ball went wide. She pivoted. Her eyes found the source right away. There was no bewilderment on her face. It was acknowledgement, the expression of someone who knew exactly what had happened and who might have been, secretly yearning for this very moment to eventually come to pass. The umpire paused. The audience muttered. At courtside competitions, players acquire a sixth sense that distinguishes between situations when something truly inappropriate has happened and situations where anxiety and pressure fabricate apparent grievances. It was evident from the atmosphere that permeated those stands that this fell into a completely other category. Eala took deliberate steps toward the umpire. She asked that the obstacle be formally acknowledged and the point reiterated in a quiet but unmistakably direct manner. The seconds stretched painfully as the umpire deliberated. Professional athletes receive coaching, training, and occasionally contractual guidance on how to communicate diplomatically after a game. Despite the agony, maintain a smile. Give your opponent credit. Talk about issues that need improvement. Redirect disagreement using tactful, well-crafted wording that preserves the sport's professional appearance. As soon as Alex Eala entered the press conference, all of those unspoken assumptions were demolished. She took a seat, adjusted the microphone, and started speaking with the cool accuracy of someone who had not practiced anything since she didn't need to prepare for the truth. She gave a thorough account of the in-court incident, including its timing, intentionality, and the pattern she had personally seen emerging at several moments before to the most heinous moment. She brought up the umpire's reluctance. Without an apology or any qualification, she admitted her own emotional reaction. Then she said something that, within 60 minutes, went viral on the internet and hasn't stopped since. Throughout my career, I have faced challenging opponents. I'm not afraid of losing, but I am afraid of losing because someone has determined that the rules don't apply to them. This tour has to quit dodging the discussion. The press room was silent. Notebooks ceased to move. The cameras continued to roll. With startling quickness, a whole firestorm gathered around those two sentences. Within hours, the video was shared on every media imaginable by Filipino fans who had previously mobilized, watched, and been emotionally invested in every aspect of Aya's career. The hashtag calling for WTA responsibility had received hundreds of thousands of responses by midnight from tennis communities on 6 continents. However, her opponent's camp responded more quickly than anyone had expected. Aya's press conference remarks were described as emotionally motivated deception in a formal statement that was meticulously crafted and timed. The language was quantified. There was a clear implication. It implied that a young, enthusiastic tennis player from a disadvantaged country may have mistaken competitive energy for intentional wrongdoing, a narrative that further heightened the public outrage already mounting against it. Players from the past quickly joined in. While not explicitly endorsing Aya's allegation, a number of people with decades of tour experience posted social media comments that pointedly questioned why some renowned players' behavioral patterns routinely went unnoticed. It was impossible to ignore the subtext. Video analysts started dissecting each frame in the meantime. The courtside accounts were sourced by independent tennis podcasters. In a thread, a former WTA ball person who had worked that very match described what they saw firsthand, and in every important detail, their account matched Aya's account. The story that her opponent's group tried to create. Professional sports governing organizations have one thing in common. Until public pressure turns delay from a tactic into a liability, they proceed purposefully slowly. At around 9:47 the next morning, that time came for the WTA. The official statement issued through their communications channels acknowledged the incident, affirmed that a formal investigation had been started in accordance with the provisions of the WTA Code of Conduct, and promised open communication about the results and any disciplinary actions that were supported by the evidence. Institutional vocabulary, conventional language, and the type of meticulously constructed paragraph that it makes no particular commitments while simultaneously promising responsibility. Tennis fans who had followed the tournament for decades could instantly read between those sanitized lines. Hindrance, which is defined as any intentional activity by a player that interferes with an opponent's reasonable preparation or execution of a shot, is specifically addressed in the WTA rule. Book governing on-court conduct. Penalties range from warnings and point deductions to possible game penalties and, in severe documented situations, default. The verification burden is something that the rulebook does not clearly and directly address. How officials, under pressure and with limited visibility, discern between competitive gamesmanship and actual obstruction in real time. For years, certain players had been shielded by this ambiguity. Everybody on the tour was aware of it. Before Eala, no one publicly stated it. Andrea Pekovic, a former world number 4 who is never afraid to discuss structural problems in women's tennis, conducted an interview that went viral. She described the structural issue that Eala's circumstances had shown with surgical accuracy, without mentioning any specific investigators. After every tournament cycle, the behavioral history of a certain tier of players is effectively archived and forgotten. Memory is necessary for accountability. Documentation is necessary for memory. Additionally, officials that put integrity before convenience are needed for documentation. Billie Jean King issued a reaction with 4 sentences that could stand alone as a full statement. Billie Jean King's entire career is based on his insistence that women's sports face difficult institutional realities rather than handle them in silence. The girl is entitled to explanations. More people responded to those 4 words than to the WTA's formal investigation statement. Conversations that had previously exclusively taken place in private, in locker rooms, during practice sessions, and over meals away from media visibility started to surface in more public settings inside tournament venues. Professional sports investigations seldom have the dramatic clarity of courtroom television. Evidence builds up over time. Cross-referencing is necessary for witness accounts. Before any tenable conclusion is reached, official match paperwork, umpire reports, challenge records, and audio recordings from on-court microphones must be carefully and methodically analyzed. Sometimes, though, one document can make all the difference. Speaking under strict anonymity due to the sensitive nature of ongoing WTA proceedings, sources familiar with the investigation's internal progress described the umpire's official match report as being more detailed than usual and containing notations that directly supported Eala's timeline of events. In particular, the report purportedly showed that the presiding authority had internally marked the occurrence and issue as needing additional investigation, but had refrained from taking any action because of confusion regarding classification under current restrictive norms. This reluctance, which was reasonable from a human perspective and important from a professional accountability one, became the main focus of the inquiry. A voluntary statement detailing their visual viewpoint on the contested moment was given by a courtside coach who was present throughout the game and was not associated with either of the competing players. According to the same sources, their account verified that the disturbance came from the opponent's specified area and happened within a time span that ruled out inadvertent cause as a plausible explanation. More importantly, investigators apparently found that this particular opponent had amassed 3 distinct hindrance nearby notations throughout 4 prior tournament cycles. This information spread quickly through the media. None had advanced past unofficial documentation. None had prompted official examination. Each had been filed without escalation after being handled using the normal incident logging system. Eala's comments at the press conference suggested a pattern that wasn't speculative. It was documented in official documents, stored in precisely the kind of institutional memory Andrea Pekovic had characterized as being consistently lacking in accountability procedures. A taped conversation with a former WTA touring professional who competed at the top level for 20 years and currently works in player development may have been the most watched tennis material of the entire month. Seldom does history make a formal announcement while sitting quietly and carefully selecting each word. The events that truly transform sports culture often come in the form of isolated disputes, one-off situations involving particular people that at first seem to be about nothing more than themselves. Alex Eala's encounter with her opponent on that court, her reluctance to deal with the incident in private, and her choice to talk candidly about a topic that women's tennis had been navigating through diplomatic silence for generations in a press room. This was never just about one game, one interruption, or one contested hindrance call. This was about all the young players who experienced something similar and realized that speaking up was more expensive than remaining silent. Every athlete from a developing tennis nation knew instinctively that the power system in sports provided different levels of protection based on institutional ties, origin, and ranking. Every competitor who came across conduct that went beyond both stated regulations and fundamental human dignity was informed, either formally or informally, that tolerance rather than accountability was necessary for the future of the profession. Eala provided that players with an uncommon and genuinely valuable precedent. The occurrence satisfied the technical level for hindrance classification under current code requirements. According to the written conclusion of the WTA's investigation, the opponent was subject to a disciplinary procedure. Sources close to the hearings described the particular sanctions, which are confidential under regular WTA practice, as large and proportionate. In the months that followed, the sport's governance structure would have to respond to the question of whether they sufficiently addressed the more general pattern of behavior that had been observed across several tournament cycles. However, something had already been built that was more resilient than any one disciplinary result. Players from all levels of the WTA rankings, from Grand Slam winners to those struggling through qualifying rounds, openly admitted that Eala's openness to talk had given them newfound freedom. Permission to identify experiences instead than absorbing them, authorization to insist on the integrity of official procedures rather than their convenience, permission to be young, female, Filipino, and completely unrepentant about wanting the rules to be applied equally regardless of geography or reputation. In the Philippines, the response went far beyond athletics. Athletes from a variety of sports, including basketball, boxing, swimming, and athletics, cited Eala's behavior as an example of advocacy. Her press conference was discussed with the same fervor as her forehand victories by young Filipino girls in schools that had hosted viewing parties for her matches. She had modeled something that went well beyond tournament bracket baseline exchanges. She had set an example of bravery with repercussions. Her ranking kept rising. She kept improving her game. One of tennis's most promising up-and-coming players, Alex Eala, entered the court. She left the debate surrounding it as something far more important, a benchmark, a spark, and an example that honesty and quality are interdependent rather than competing priorities. The WTA looked into it, the sport looked at itself, and a young woman from Manila reminded everyone in the world of professional tennis that silence was never truly neutral, no matter how handy it could be for one's career. When snorts, she went with the truth. Whether or not to totally follow is still up for debate in the sport. Subscribe now if this story touched you and you think women's tennis needs more in-depth, truthful reporting than highlight reels and cursory coverage. Every week, we go beyond the scorelines to bring you the stories that the sport hopes you miss, so hit the notification bell. This is already less controversial than the next one. Don't pass it up. Pass it up.